John Steinbeck begins not with his characters, but with a place, a sanctuary. He paints a picture of a tranquil spot by the Salinas River, deep and green. The setting is lush and alive, with willows, sycamores, and the tracks of rabbits, coons, and deer that come to drink in the dark. It's a place of peace, a refuge that feels ancient and untouched, marked only by a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranches to swim, and by tramps who come wearily down from the highway. There's an old ash pile from many fires, a sign that others have sought shelter here. The quiet is so profound that when rabbits sit on the sandbanks, they are as still as little gray sculptured stones. This isn't just description. It's the creation of a safe haven, a stark contrast to the world that is about to intrude. And then, two men emerge. They walk in single file, a habit of the trail that speaks to a long journey. The man in front, George, is small and quick, dark of face, with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him is defined. Following him is his polar opposite, Lennie, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes. Steinbeck's description of Lennie is immediately striking and infused with animal imagery. He drags his feet the way a bear drags his paws, and his arms don't swing but hang loosely. The moment they stop, their dynamic is laid bare. Lennie, without a second thought, throws himself down and drinks from the green pool with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. George's reaction is instant and parental. "Lennie," he said sharply, "don't drink so much. You gonna be sick like you was last night." Lennie is pure impulse and simple joy, delighting in the water and telling George, "That's good. You take a good big drink." He is utterly dependent, mimicking George's every move, looking over to see whether he had it just right. This relationship is one of leader and follower, caretaker and child. We quickly see the weight of this responsibility on George. His frustration with the world comes out in a tirade against a bus driver who dropped them off miles from their destination. This anger then pivots to Lennie, who has already forgotten where they are going. "So yon forgot that already, did you?" George scolds. "You're a crazy bastard." Lennie's response is soft and apologetic. "I forgot. I tried not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George." The only thing he can consistently hold on to is a future promise. "I remember about the rabbits, George." This scene introduces a crucial element of Lennie's character, his fixation on soft things. George discovers Lennie is hiding something. After some prodding, Lennie admits, "It's only a mouse, George. A dead mouse, which he found and wants to keep so he could pet it with my thumb while we walked along." There's a heartbreaking innocence to the desire, but it's deeply unsettling. George, knowing the practical dangers, confiscates it and throws it across the river. This isn't just about a mouse. It's a glimpse into Lennie's inability to understand death and his potentially destructive tenderness. The conflict repeats itself moments later when George realizes Lennie has retrieved the mouse, leading to another confrontation where George has to wrench it away from him again. He scolds Lennie. "That mouse ain't fresh, Lennie, and besides, you've broke it petting it." We learn this is a pattern. His Aunt Clara used to give him mice, but that lady ain't here. You always killed him. Lennie's sad apology is devastating in its simplicity. "They was so little. I'd pet 'em, and pretty soon they bit my fingers, and I pinched their heads a little, and then they was dead." The weight of their past hangs heavy. George alludes to trouble they fled from in a town called Weed. When Lennie can't remember, George's frustration explodes in a powerful, painful monologue about the life he could have had without Lennie. "God almighty, if I was alone, I could live so easy," he rages, fantasizing about taking his pay and spending it however he wants, pool or at a cat house. "And what I got," he continues furiously, "I got you. You can't keep a job and you lose me every job I get." He brings up the incident in Weed, revealing they had to hide in an irrigation ditch because Lennie, wanting to feel a girl's dress as he would a mouse, held on too tight and scared her. The raw anger leaves George as quickly as it came, replaced by shame as he sees Lennie's anguished face. This is their ritual. Lennie, wounded, offers to leave and go live in a cave, a place where he could find a mouse and keep it. George immediately pulls back, his anger melting into affection and necessity. "I was just fooling, Lennie, 'cause I want you to stay with me." To seal the reconciliation, Lennie asks George to tell him about their dream, the story that sustains them both. George's voice becomes rhythmic, like a prayer he's recited countless times. He speaks of the loneliness of ranch hands who got no family. They don't belong no place, but not them. With us, it ain't like that, George says. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. Lennie finishes the most important part. Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you, and that's why. They dream of a little house and a couple of acres, where they'll live off the fat of the land. And most importantly for Lennie, he will get to tend the rabbits. This dream is their armor against a harsh world. It's not just Lennie who needs it. George needs it too. As the chapter closes, George, ever the pragmatist, prepares for the future. He drills Lennie on staying silent during the job interview the next day. Then, in a moment of chilling foreshadowing, he makes Lennie memorize their location by the river. Lennie, if you just happen to get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. It's a safety plan, an admission that George believes trouble isn't a possibility, but an inevitability. The story moves from the natural sanctuary of the riverbank to the man-made world of the ranch bunkhouse. Steinbeck describes a long rectangular building where the walls are whitewashed and the floor is unpainted. It's a sparse transient space. Each of the 8 bunks has an apple box nailed above it for personal belongings, creating 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant. These shelves, holding soap, razors, Western magazines, and medicine, are the only signs of individuality in a place that seems designed to erase it. This isn't a home. It's a holding pen for labor. George and Lennie are led in by an old swamper, a handyman named Candy, who is missing a hand, and instead has a round stick-like wrist. The tension begins immediately. George, ever cautious, finds a small yellow can of lice killer on his shelf and confronts the old man. What the hell kind of bed you giving us anyways? We don't want no pants rabbits. Candy defends the cleanliness of the bunk's previous occupant, a blacksmith named Whitey, describing him as a man so fastidious he'd peel his boiled potatoes and he'd take out every little spot before he'd eat it. It's a small telling detail about the lives of these men. They come and go, leaving behind only a can of bug powder and a story. The boss enters, a little stocky man wearing high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. His suspicion is immediate and palpable. He questions why they're a day late, and George gives the excuse about the bum steer from the bus driver. The boss's interrogation quickly zeroes in on the strange dynamic between George and Lennie. When George answers for Lennie, the boss becomes wary. He ain't much of a talker, is he? Lennie, forgetting his instructions to stay quiet, proudly repeats George's compliment, strong as a bull, earning a scowl from George and dropping his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss's suspicion cuts to the heart of their relationship, something unheard of in his world. Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I just like to know what your interest is. George is forced to lie, creating a backstory that Lennie is his cousin who got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. The lie works for now, but the boss leaves with a warning. I got my eye on you. As soon as he's gone, George's anger flares. So, you wasn't going to say a word. I'm near lost us the job. Lennie's hopeless reply, I forgot George, is the simple, recurring truth of their lives. Just as their private argument gets heated, Candy returns, this time with his dog at his heels. An ancient creature, gray of muzzle, and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog is a mirror of Candy himself, old, worn out, and struggling to keep up. The introduction of this animal is a masterful touch by Steinbeck, a living symbol of what happens when something outlives its usefulness on the ranch. Then, the story's antagonist walks in. Curly, the boss's son, is a thin young man with a brown face and a head of tightly curled hair. His posture is immediately aggressive. He sizes up the new men, and his eyes land on Lennie. As Candy later explains, Curly has a Napoleon complex. He's like a lot of little guys, the swamper whispers. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys, kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. Curly's aggression towards Lennie is instant and unprovoked. He tries to bait him, demanding, let the big guy talk, but George runs interference, coldly stating, we travel together. The air is thick with the promise of violence. The danger isn't just Curly. Candy quickly turns his gossip to Curly's new wife, whom he married just a couple of weeks ago. He calls her a tart and warns that she got the eye. He shares a lewd detail about Curly wearing a glove full of Vaseline to keep that hand soft for his wife, a fact that disgusts George and paints a portrait of Curly's gross insecurity and possessiveness. George, seeing the threats piling up, immediately warns Lennie to steer clear of Curly. "If he tangles with you, Lennie, we're gonna get the can." He then reinforces the emergency plan from the night before. "If you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do? Hide in the brush by the river." Just as he says this, the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway is blocked. Curly's wife is standing there. She is exactly as described. Full, rouged lips, heavily made-up eyes, red fingernails, and a dress that she poses in to throw her body forward. Lennie is instantly fascinated. As she leaves, he says dreamily, "She's purty." George's reaction is violent and terrified. He grabs Lennie by the ear, shaking him. "Listen to me, you crazy bastard. Don't you even take a look at that. You leave her be. She's a rat trap, if I ever seen one." The oppressive atmosphere is too much for Lennie, who has the pure instincts of an animal. He cries out, "I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here." But they can't leave. They need their steak. Finally, a figure of grace and dignity appears. Slim, the jerkline skinner, enters with a natural majesty. He is the prince of the ranch, his authority so profound that his word was taken on any subject. Unlike the suspicious boss or the aggressive Curly, Slim is calm and perceptive. His ear heard more than was said to him. He comments on the rarity of George and Lennie's partnership, musing, "Ain't many guys travel around together. Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other." In this one line, he articulates the novel's central theme of loneliness. The arrival of another ranch hand, Carlson, brings news that immediately changes everything for Lennie. Slim's dog has had puppies. While Carlson brutally suggests Candy should shoot his old smelly dog and take a new pup, Lennie hears only one thing: a chance for a new, soft creature. The chapter ends with his breathless, excited plea to George, a brown and white one. "You ask him right away, George, so he won't kill no more of 'em." The bunkhouse is cloaked in dusk, the silence punctuated by the thuds and occasional clangs of a horseshoe game outside. Inside, under the glare of a single shaded light, George is opening up to Slim. The conversation starts as a simple thank you from George for the puppy Slim gave Lennie. But Slim offers an invitation to confidence, remarking on the strangeness of two men traveling together. This gentle prodding allows George to unburden himself in a way we haven't seen before. He confesses the truth of his bond with Lennie, explaining they grew up in the same town and that he took Lennie in after his Aunt Clara died. In a raw moment of self-reflection, George admits he wasn't always Lennie's protector. "I used to have a hell of a lot of fun with him," he says, his voice taking on the tone of confession. He talks about playing cruel jokes on Lennie because he was too dumb to take care of himself, making himself smart alongside of him. The turning point came one day by the Sacramento River. I turns to Lennie and says, "Jump in." And he jumps. Couldn't swim a stroke. What stopped George for good was Lennie's reaction. "And he was so nice to me for pulling him out. Clean forgot I told him to jump in." This experience cemented George's role as a guardian, a responsibility he now fully accepts. Trusting Slim's quiet authority, George even tells him the full, unvarnished story of what happened in Weed. How Lennie, drawn to a girl's red dress, just wants to feel it. And in his frightened confusion, holds on because that's the only thing he can think to do, leading to an accusation of rape and a lynch mob that forced them to hide in an irrigation ditch all day. Slim, with his profound understanding, simply concludes, "He ain't mean. I can tell a mean guy a mile off." Just as this deep confession ends, Lennie himself comes in, having snuck the tiny puppy into the bunkhouse against his stomach. George immediately plays the parent, scolding him, "You get right up and take this pup back to the nest. You'll kill him the first thing you know." The incident perfectly illustrates the truth George just told Slim. As Slim observes, "He's just like a kid, ain't he?" The chapter then pivots to one of the most heart-wrenching scenes in the novel. Carlson, a thick-bodied and pragmatic ranch hand, begins a relentless campaign to get rid of Candy's ancient, blind, and arthritic dog. His logic is brutal and unsentimental. "He ain't no good to you, Candy, and he ain't no good to himself. Why ain't you shoot him, Candy?" Candy pathetically resists, his love for his old companion evident in his simple protests. "Well, hell, I had him so long. Had him since he was a pup." The pressure mounts as the other men in their silence consent. Candy looks desperately to Slim, whose opinions are law, but Slim delivers the final verdict. "Carl's right, Candy. That dog ain't no good to himself. I wish somebody'd shoot me if I get old and a cripple." Defeated, Candy gives in. "All right, take him," he says softly and hopelessly, before lying back on his bunk and staring at the ceiling. What follows is a masterful display of tension by Steinbeck. The bunkhouse falls into an agonizing silence, thick with the anticipation of the gunshot. The men try to make small talk, but the silence fell on the room again. It came out of the night and invaded the room. When the distant shot finally sounds, every head turned toward Candy, who rolled slowly over and faced the wall and lay silent. The parallel is clear and terrifying. In this world, the old and weak are disposable. It is in this bleak atmosphere of loss and dread that the dream is reborn, stronger than ever. To fill the silence, George begins telling Lennie their familiar story about the little farm they're going to have. But this time, someone else is listening. Candy, having just lost his only companion, turns over from the wall. He overhears the plan, the 10 acres, the chickens, the rabbits, and a desperate hope sparks within him. He sees his own future in his dog's fate. "They'll can me pretty soon," he says. "Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouses, they'll put me on the county." He offers them his life savings, $350, to be part of the dream. Suddenly, the fantasy becomes a viable plan. For the first time, George truly believes it's possible. "Oh, I bet we could swing her," he says, his eyes full of wonder. The dream is no longer a myth. It's a goal, a 1-month plan to escape. But this fragile, beautiful hope is immediately threatened. Curly, humiliated after a confrontation with Slim, comes into the bunkhouse looking for a target. He spots Lennie, who is still smiling with delight at the memory of the ranch, and assumes he's being laughed at. He viciously attacks Lennie, who is too terrified to defend himself, crying, "Make 'em let me alone, George!" George finally screams the order, "Get 'em, Lennie!" Lennie reaches out and catches Curly's swinging fist, and in an instant, the fight is over. He crushes Curly's hand completely, flopping like a fish on a line, not out of malice, but pure terror and obedience. He only lets go when George slaps him, whimpering, "You told me to, George!" Slim, ever the respected leader, concocts a story to save their jobs, that Curly's hand was caught in a machine, blackmailing Curly into silence. In the aftermath, Lennie, his face bruised and bloody, has only one question, the question that fuels his entire world. "I can still tend the rabbits, George." On a Saturday night, while the other ranch hands are in town, the narrative takes us into the private, isolated world of Crooks, the black stable-buck. His room is not in the main bunkhouse, but in a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. Steinbeck masterfully details this space, showing us a man who, unlike the transient workers, is permanent and has accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Crooks owns books, a tattered dictionary, and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code, as well as medicine bottles, tools, and a shotgun. He is a proud, aloof man who kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His room is his sanctuary, a small kingdom carved out of a world that has segregated and crippled him, both physically with his crooked spine and socially. Into this fiercely guarded solitude, Lennie appears, his large frame nearly filling the opening of the doorway. His reason for being there is innocent. He came to see his puppy and saw Crooks's light. Crooks's reaction is immediately hostile, a defense mechanism honed by years of exclusion. "You got no right to come in my room," he says sharply. "I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." When Lennie, with his childlike incomprehension, asks why, Crooks's answer is blunt and bitter, "'Cause I'm black." However, Lennie's simple, non-threatening presence and his disarming smile eventually wear down Crooks's defenses. Starved for companionship, he lets Lennie stay. Seeing an opportunity to hold power over someone for the first time, Crooks begins a cruel psychological game. He finds Lennie's vulnerability, his total dependence on George, and attacks it. "Suppose George don't come back no more. He prods, his face lighting with pleasure in his torture as he watches Lennie's growing fear. He paints a terrifying picture of Lennie's future alone. They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. But the power dynamic flips in an instant. Lennie, believing George is in actual danger, rises and walks dangerously toward Crooks, demanding, "Who hurt George?" Faced with Lennie's immense physical threat, Crooks is terrified and immediately retracts his torment. The confrontation breaks him open, and he confesses the gnawing loneliness that defines his life. A guy needs somebody to be near him, he whines. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. He reveals that without another person to talk to, a man can't even be sure what's real. It's a powerful, heartbreaking monologue on the human need for connection. When Lennie inevitably starts talking about the farm and the rabbits, Crooks is initially filled with scorn. He's seen this dream before. I seen hundreds of men come by, with their bindles on their back and that same thing in their heads, he says cynically. But then Candy shows up, hesitantly entering Crooks's room for the first time ever, breaking an unspoken racial taboo. When Crooks dismisses their plan, Candy pushes back with newfound confidence. "We're gonna do it. George says we are. We got the money right now." Hearing this, that the money is real, that the dream is tangible, shatters Crooks's cynicism. The possibility of belonging somewhere, of escaping his painful isolation, is too powerful to resist. He swallows his pride and makes a tentative offer. "If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just as keep, why, I'd come and lend a hand." For a brief, beautiful moment, the outcasts, a disabled old man, a mentally challenged giant, and a black man, have formed a community, united by a shared dream. This fragile hope is immediately and violently destroyed by the arrival of Curly's wife. She enters and surveys the room's occupants, stating, "They left all the weak ones here." She, too, is an outcast, trapped and desperately lonely, lashing out at the world. "Think I don't like to talk to somebody ever once in a while?" she demands. The men are hostile, wanting nothing to do with the trouble she represents. Empowered by the dream of his own land, Candy stands up to her. But when Crooks, also feeling a flicker of empowerment, tells her to get out of his room, she turns on him with sickening cruelty. She reminds him of his place in the racial hierarchy, using the most terrifying threat she can muster. "You know what I can do to you if you open your trap? I could get you strung up on a tree so easy it ain't even funny." The threat works instantly. Crooks is utterly crushed, having reduced himself to nothing. The dream of an inclusive community is dead. The racial hierarchy has been brutally reasserted by another powerless person weaponizing the one advantage she has. When George returns and finds them there, he chastises them for being in Crooks's room, reinforcing the very segregation they had briefly overcome. The spell broken, Crooks retreats back into his protective shell. "Remember what I said about hoeing and doing odd jobs?" he calls out to Candy. "Well, just forget it. I didn't mean it. Just fooling. I wouldn't want to go no place like that." The chapter ends as it began, with Crooks alone in his room, rubbing his aching back, his brief hope for companionship extinguished. The final Sunday afternoon on the ranch begins in a state of deceptive peace. The great barn is quiet and warm, filled with bright lines of sun slicing through the cracks, the lazy afternoon humming with the buzz of flies while the sounds of a horseshoe game drift in from outside. But inside this tranquil setting, the novel's central tragedy is unfolding. Lennie is alone, sitting in the hay, staring at the small, limp body of the puppy Slim gave him. His internal monologue is a heartbreaking cycle of confusion, sorrow, and fear. He isn't mourning the loss of a pet. He's terrified of losing his dream. "Now, maybe George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits if he finds out you got killed," he whispers to the dead pup. His fear quickly turns to anger at the creature for being so fragile, for dying and jeopardizing his future. Hurling the puppy away from him, "Why do you got to get killed?" Into this scene of private grief and panic, Curly's wife appears. Lennie, remembering George's strict orders, tries to shut her down. George says, "I ain't to have nothing to do with you." But she, like the other outcasts, is consumed by a desperate loneliness. "Why can't I talk to you?" she pleads. "I never get to talk to nobody. I get awful lonely." What follows is a devastatingly poignant conversation where two incredibly isolated people talk past each other, each revealing their own broken dreams. As Lennie speaks of their plan for a little place in Rabbits, she pours out her own story of a life she could have had. She talks of missed opportunities to join a traveling show or be in pictures, convinced a letter that would have launched her career was stolen by her mother. She confesses her bitter disappointment in her life and her marriage, admitting, "I don't like Curly. He ain't a nice fella." The conversation takes its fatal turn when Lennie reveals his core fixation. "I like to pet nice things. Soft things. This is the one thing Curly's wife can understand and connect with. Everybody likes that," she says, trying to build a bridge between their lonely worlds. "I like to feel silk and velvet. When I'm doing my hair sometimes, I just sit and stroke it 'cause it's so soft." In a tragically miscalculated gesture of camaraderie, she invites him to feel it. "Here, feel, right here," she says, taking his hand and putting it on her hair. The inevitable happens with horrifying speed. Lennie's clumsy strength takes over. When she panics and tries to pull away, he panics too, his fingers closing on her hair and hung on. Her screams terrify him, not for her safety, but because he knows George gonna say I done a bad thing. He ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits. In a desperate attempt to silence her, he covers her mouth and, in his confusion and anger, shakes her. The description is chillingly familiar. Her body flopped like a fish, and then she was still, for Lennie had broken her neck. His bewildered realization, "I done a bad thing. I done another bad thing," is followed by the cold recall of George's instructions. "Hide in the brush till he come." He grabs the dead puppy and flees the barn. In the aftermath, Steinbeck creates a moment of haunting stillness. He describes the dead woman, noting that all the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. In death, she is finally granted a peace and innocence she never had in life. Candy is the one to find her, and he immediately brings George. George's reaction is not shock, but grim, weary acceptance. "I should have knew," he says hopelessly. "I guess maybe way back in my head I did." Candy's first desperate thought is for their dream. "You and me can get that little place, can't we, George?" he begs, but he already knows the answer. The dream dies in that moment. George confirms it, admitting he never truly believed it was possible. "I think I knowed from the very first we'd never do her." The dream was just a story, a shield against the harshness of their lives. And now it has shattered. Candy, his own future erased, turns his grief and anger on the dead woman. When the other men storm in, the scene explodes into a manhunt. Curly is not a grieving husband. He's a vengeful man driven by wounded pride. "I'll kill the big son of a bitch myself," he seethes. When Carlson discovers his Luger is missing, they assume Lennie is armed, and the lynch mob is formed. Slim, ever the voice of reason, tries to explain to George the grim reality of what would happen to Lennie if he were captured. "Suppose they lock him up and strap him down and put him in a cage. That ain't no good, George." Caught in an impossible trap, George agrees to join the hunting party, his feet dragging heavily as he follows them out of the barn, leaving Candy alone with the body and the ghost of their shared dream. The novel comes full circle, returning to the serene setting by the Salinas River where the journey began. But the sanctuary is no longer a place of peace. In a moment of stunning and brutal foreshadowing, Steinbeck shows us nature's own harsh reality. A heron, standing motionless in the shallows, snatches a water snake from the pool and swallows it whole. The paradise has been tainted by the same predatory violence that defines the world of men. This is the place George designated as a refuge, and it is here that the story's final tragic act will play out. Lennie appears, just as he was told, coming as silently as a creeping bear moves. He has remembered George's instruction. As he sits by the water, his mind, fractured by guilt and fear, conjures two harrowing visions. The first is of his Aunt Clara, who appears as a little fat old woman but speaks in Lennie's voice, scolding him for being a burden on George. "He could have had such a good time if it wasn't for you," she says, voicing all of Lennie's deepest insecurities. The second vision is even more cruel. A gigantic rabbit, the very symbol of his dream, appears and tells him he's not fit to lick the boots of no rabbit. It taunts him, saying, George is sick of him and then go away and leave you. This is the sound of Lennie's own innocence turning against him, his dream becoming a nightmare. When George finally arrives, he is not the angry but protective figure of Lennie's visions. He is stiff and quiet, his voice wooden and monotonous. He is a man hollowed out by grief and a terrible resolve. Lennie, seeking the comfort of their familiar ritual, asks George to scold him. "Ain't you gonna give me hell?" he pleads. George recites the old, tired words about how easy his life would be alone. But there is no anger in them, only a profound weariness. As the shouts of the approaching lynch mob grow closer, Lennie makes one last request. "Tell me like you done before," he asks, needing to hear the story of their dream one final time. What follows is one of the most poignant and devastating scenes in all of literature. George, knowing what he must do, begins to paint the picture of their future farm. He tells Lennie to look across the river and imagine the little piece of land, a place where they will belong and be safe. "Look across the river, Lennie," he says, "and I'll tell you so you can almost see it." While Lennie is lost in this happy vision, George quietly takes out Carlson's Luger. His hand shakes violently as he raises the gun. He continues the story, letting Lennie describe the rabbits, his voice a soothing balm against the approaching danger. Lennie, in his final moments, is filled with pure happiness. "And live on the fat of the land," he giggles. George offers him a final absolution, a last act of love and reassurance. "No, Lennie, I ain't mad. I never been mad, and I ain't now. That's the thing I want you to know." Then, as Lennie begs to go to their dream place right now, George steadies his hand, brings the muzzle close to the back of Lennie's head, and pulls the trigger. Lennie jarred, and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. The mob arrives to find the deed done. Curly is triumphant, but Slim, with his deep, quiet wisdom, understands immediately. He sits beside the shattered George, offering the only comfort possible in such a moment. "Never you mind, a guy got to sometimes." The others, however, are incapable of comprehension. Carlson, representing the callous indifference of the world, asks how it happened. To protect himself, George lets them believe the lie, that he fought Lennie for the gun and killed him in self-defense. The novel ends with Carlson watching Slim lead George away for a drink, completely bewildered by their grief. And so, John Steinbeck's powerful novella concludes, not with a resolution, but with the stark reality of a shattered dream. Of Mice and Men is a testament to the profound human need for companionship in a world rife with loneliness, and the tragic story of a friendship that was too fragile to survive its harsh realities. The dream of the farm was more than just land. It was a vision of freedom, dignity, and belonging that was ultimately unattainable for the powerless and the marginalized. The story's heartbreaking conclusion leaves us with the devastating understanding that in a world that doesn't value empathy, the most merciful act can look like the most brutal, and the deepest bonds can be utterly invisible to the unfeeling eyes of society.